Welcome to this bonus episode of The Reading Cure, in which we'll be discussing the movie Nebraska, directed by Alexander Payne. Welcome to The Reading Cure, the bibliotherapy podcast where great books and great ideas are what we like to prescribe. My name is Dr. Stephen Davis, and my co-host is Dr. Alexander Fox. Now, this is a bonus episode of the podcast, and as with previous bonuses, we're going to be discussing a film rather than a book. In this case, the 2013 comedy drama Nebraska, directed by Alexander Payne. Now, to give you some background into the plot of that film, it revolves around Woody Grant, a frail, elderly, and rather willful man, played by Bruce Dern, who believes he's won $1 million from a magazine sweepstakes. Despite his family's protestations that this is an obvious scam to get people to subscribe to the magazine, Woody becomes fixated on travelling from Montana to Lincoln, Nebraska, in order to collect his prize. And he makes several attempts to set off on foot to do this, despite it being a 800 or 900 mile journey, which result in his being picked up by the police at the roadside. One of his sons, David, played by Will Forte, decides it's probably best to just drive his dad to Nebraska, and much to the chagrin of his mother, Kate, that's what he does, in the hope that the journey will serve as an opportunity for him to connect with his very taciturn inward father. As the pair embark on their journey through the vast and desolate landscapes of the Midwest, we quickly learn about Woody's lifelong alcoholism, which led him to be a very absent father to his two sons. David takes the opportunity to make a stop off at Woody's small hometown of Hawthorne, Nebraska, where they stay with his brother Ray and his wife and their two grown-up and rather unscrupulous sons Cole and Bart. Now, rumours quickly spread within the family and across the small town about Woody's supposed windfall, despite David's protestations that it isn't real, and the prospect of getting a cut attracts the attention of various characters from Woody's past, notably his former business partner Ed Pegram. Pegram is a smooth-talking and manipulative character who ultimately tries to extort thousands of pounds from Woody's fictional fortune by threatening David with legal action for a supposed past debt. David learns a great deal about his dad's past during their stay in Hawthorne. He meets up with a past flame. He learns about an affair his father had just prior to his birth, and he eventually visits the now abandoned family homestead in which Woody grew up. Word ultimately gets around the town about the true nature of Woody's ticket after his nephews mug him and David outside of the local bar and temporarily get their hands on the phony ticket. Woody remains undeterred, however, despite this humiliation, and after failing to convince his dad to end the futile quest, David regains the ticket and completes the journey to Lincoln with his dad. Their attempts to claim the prize end in inevitable disappointment, and Woody is given a meagre consolation in the form of an appropriately bad taste baseball cap with the word winner on it. However, David has gained a deeper understanding of and respect for his father from their time together, and he manages to contrive a partial victory for Woody. He selflessly trades in his car to procure a late model truck that his father has always wanted, and he enables his dad to drive this truck down the main street in Hawthorne for all to see, with the winner cap still upon his head. Nebraska is a poignant and beautifully shot film which received an array of Oscar nominations. The film drew particular praise for Bruce Dern's superbly nuanced performance as Woody, for which he won a Best Actor award at Cannes. So the first question tonight, Alec, that we're going to talk about is about Woody, the protagonist in this film, Nebraska. He's on a determined quest to claim his $1 million in the promised land of Nebraska. And so the questions really were two-part. What kind of quest do you see this as? And is there a sense in which we're all on a quest like Woody?
Yeah, well, the way I would look at it is, when we start watching the movie, we see Woody walking up this motorway, and a police officer stopping his car and going up to approach him. And it seems like he's very confused and lost. And that's our first introduction to this character. So
Yep.
from the beginning, you've got this impression that this quest that he's on seems quite foolish and strange. Actually, on in my Prime Video, Amazon list it listed it under the genre philosophical. We could sort of see that in a way with this movie. It
Yeah.
also said it was sad, which I could understand too, but also put it under the category of strange. And I thought that was, I mean, how is that meant to invite you to watch this movie? Labeling it as strange. It's certainly quirky, but seeing it as strange is actually seeing this character Woody as someone so eccentric that it doesn't really have much applicability to us, which I would disagree with, because I do think Woody's quest, for validation and for making amends with the past is something that is pretty universal, to be honest. So for me, I if I was to summarize, I think it is to feel validated as a person and to make up for what he did in the past or what he didn't do with his family. That's how I would see the quest from his perspective.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I certainly agree. I agree with that. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't. I didn't think there was anything strange about it. I thought. I mean, obviously, this kind of road movie kind of scenario has been a little bit inverted here. I know that the director of this one, Alexander Payne, has obviously he's done films like Sideways previously and so on. So he likes this kind of genre, this kind of format. But yeah, for me, I mean, it is. I suppose having a character who's on the quest that is a little bit impaired in his faculties, is unusual because it kind of raises the question about what exactly is motivating it, how much it's confusion, how much it's actually a very specific goal. Certainly, it's not a completely realistic goal here. But I mean, I thought it was still relatable in spite of the fact he's an elderly character who's having his memory and so on isn't quite what it was. There is I mean, I suppose a road trip movie would tend to kind of have a sort of sense of like self-discovery and so on for the person on the journey. And I think maybe for him, how much he can do that again is a little bit limited by how he is. But he, there is kind of growth there, and the relationship with his son David, who's on this journey with him. There's a change there in the relationship, and I think you touched on the issue about his past. This is in a way about kind of trying to reconnect with his past or make up for things in the past, and I think that's quite key here. And again, that's quite a kind of universal experience of a kind of journey or a quest that's about both the past and the future in that sense, I think.
Yeah, I mean the thing about him being mentally impaired, I would say that we don't really know about how mentally impaired he is. And I know that might seem an unusual thing to say, but since he's a man of so few words, since he's quite a shell of a man in some ways, when we join him at that point in his story, in his life story, it's hard to say whether it's dementia or the cognitive impairment. There may be that to some extent. I mean, that's how his wife, Kate, sees him.
Sure.
But we have to bear in mind that, at the very end of the movie, when he goes to collect his alleged prize, the $1 million from the marketing office, that when he leaves, the secretary says to David, he said, has he got Alzheimer's? Basically as a way of trying to understand why he believed in this prize. And he said, no, it's just that he believes what people tell him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that to me, that seems to suggest a more credible explanation is that he's in quite a desperate situation on some level, because he is at the final stage of his life. He is certainly an alcoholic.
Yeah.
he might be a little bit confused, but I don't think it's something like dementia. That's not what his son saw it as. And this idea that he believed in the prize, I think he believed it partly because he was somebody that helped so many people out, that he was an honest guy in that regard. Obviously, there's that complicated factor, the fear, which we could probably talk about later on. But I think that he was generally quite honest and would believe what was written down. And also he's so desperate to leave something to his kids. I mean, he says he wanted to leave something to David and Ross. And so I think that, believing in this voucher and this $1 million that's going to come from it is something that he can't not believe.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because I was thinking about sort of wider parallels, this idea about how much are all of us on a kind of a quest in some sense analogous to that. And I suppose you could say that, most of us, when we're motivated for a particular goal or life path and so on, it's based on some desires and motives that might be somewhat out of kilter with reality to some extent, which doesn't necessarily mean there's any actual mental impairment. Obviously with Woody, it's implausible that he could actually physically do this journey alone. He obviously keeps trying to walk it. I don't know if he's thinking he'll hitchhike. That sort of sense that he could do this doesn't seem very realistic. And obviously the prize money isn't real. But again, as you said, it is very much kind of reinforced in the movie that he is this guy who takes people at their word, and that's kind of what's happening here. So I think just in terms of like what's relatable about this quest, and putting aside the issue of mental impairment and so on, there is this sense that probably everybody will tend to maybe at times underestimate how their own particular limitations, physical or of character, perspective, or whatever, might end up sabotaging their efforts if they are pursuing something in the way that Woody is. And obviously it's one of these quests where he doesn't get the prize, but there is a kind of partial win, and that's something, again, probably a lot, it could be relatable for a lot of us as well. The idea that what you actually thought you were aspiring after, you didn't quite get that, but the process of that aspiring, that quest, you still got something from it and it was worth doing,
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that's true, that what they gain, particularly in terms of the father and son becoming closer, is something of real value. Even if the so-called prize was a MacGuffin, it was something false. They are not true at all. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what I was considering is something that the critic Lajos Egri said in his book, The Art of Creative Writing, where he said if when we're writing a character, when we're constructing a character, he says we must bear in mind that we all want to be important. And that this is what I see as a kind of universal aspect of Woody's journey, because at the end he doesn't get the money, but he does get the truck in a way that he wanted, and driving that through the town, and how it focuses on the people he passes, included Ed Pegrin, his adversary, in some ways in the movie, highlights that he got his dream. I mean, it was a very modest one in a way, but it was so important to him to have his own truck. And, other people seeing that, there was a validating quality there. The fact that it's so mundane and yet it was so sought after highlights how much we're all looking to be important and to be seen as worthy. And Woody gets that to some extent, or enough that satisfies him at the end of the movie.
I think that's true. I mean, obviously, it shows that what he really wanted, I suppose, was his self-respect, particularly when he's been somewhat humiliated. And I mean, again, he deals with the disappointment actually of, when he's told that there is no prize money, you're not getting that. And when he gets the truck, as you said, it's like that satisfies him enough, actually. You can see that that's in a way, he's got to do what it was he wanted to do and really could have done anyway had he got the prize money, which would have been quite limited. And fortunately for him, obviously, the son David that's with him on the journeys is quite savvy actually, and he really, he picks up on that, and he's very, very, very caring and helps Woody.
Yes, I mean, we'll obviously speak about David later, but who's in many ways the sort of hero of sorts of the movie. But yeah, I mean, Woody was a mechanic. Maybe he loved cars, and he didn't get his own truck back, and he then gets a chance to have his truck at the end of the movie, and he sort of gains a dignity and self-respect.
Yes,
that he hasn't had for many, many years. And I mean, not to say that we're going to blame Kate, his wife, for everything, but she, she is quite contemptuous towards him in many ways. And you could see that married life could have hollowed him out, where he was getting critiqued all the time. Okay. I'm not saying that he was a saint. Clearly, he was not, as we find out in his actions. But it seems that he lost that self-respect. And part of the quest was sort of gaining that, along with leaving a legacy to his family. So, if we see it in this kind of Erik Erikson kind of way, there's a generativity of sorts as well here, that this aging man wants to leave a legacy. He wants to leave something to his family, which is this money, which is, at least according to Erik Erikson, what many people want to do in the last phase of their life, leave something to the world, especially to their families.
Yeah, that's a great point, I think, about the legacy, because that is why this kind of quest, it had to be a man actually who wasn't at the peak of his faculties, who was going to be, so absolutely doggedly set on pursuing this, but precisely for that reason. And we hear that from, although as you've said, he's very kind of man of few words, that is something he does articulate, that wish that he could have. I think he recognizes he's not been a very good dad, particularly for the two sons. They've not really had a lot of quality time with him. He's been drinking and so on, and obviously he belatedly wants to try and do something about that in the best way he can. The only way he kind of feels able, which is not really the kind of direct communicative approach with them, but more just trying to get some money that he can pass on. And
yes, I mean it's almost like because his life ordinarily doesn't seem to have the ingredients to generate what he's looking to gain, in terms of self-respect, in terms of legacy. That's why he buys into this magical solution. Yes. Because he's so desperate to gain those things. And yet, but on this quest to get them, him and his son get closer, and David is able to understand his dad more deeply. But I mean, the bit about his faculties, well, clearly he's not as sharp as he once was, and he's a man of few words. But I think he's also lost interest in his life in some ways. He's quite distracted because there's a lack of purpose as well. And I think that's part of the reason why he seems to be not listening or somewhat abstracted when people are trying to talk to him. I'm not sure that's because he can't follow it, that his faculties are so impaired, but I think it's also he's lost interest in his life in many ways, apart from this one thing.
Yep, I think so. I think definitely. I mean, it was, again, we'll probably come to this a little bit later, but I was reading an interview with the writer. What was his name again? Sorry, let me just flick through here. Bob Nelson, that was it. Bob Nelson, who was the writer of the film, and he talked about the fact that for a lot, for children, often they don't know their parents necessarily very well. They have this kind of limited view. And I think he talked about wanting to really build up this character, Woody, in a way that did leave the audiences actually a little bit trying to get to the root of him, and almost have that experience of a very kind of taciturn guy that you're not quite quite sure straight off what actually it is that's going on with him. There's a kind of
Exactly.
inwardness and a kind of complicated, something's not right, and there's a kind of conflict there. So it does feel a bit like, watching the film, you kind of undergo that same kind of journey of understanding that the two sons do, particularly David as well, of getting a bit more of a sense of why he is the way he is actually. And it's definitely not, as you say, just like mental impairment. It's much more, I mean, he's for the most part lucid and responds to people and so on.
I
So it's not,
I don't think it is me. I wouldn't personally say it was that we have enough evidence to say it was mental impairment
no.
overall. And I think that what the writer said seems to be very true. That this is almost like an exercise in learning not to be judgmental, because when we first meet the character, yes, the movie seems to fit this designation, this label of being strange, and we could just say that this guy seems out of it, and then as we learn about his story, we can see how he became what he was, and that there is and it's a more complex and sadder story than what we might have guessed. I mean, his own wife is just depicting him as a buffoon that needs to be thrown in a home, as a burden, essentially.
Sure. Yep.
And so that we've got this impression, very early on, that this is how he could be, really.
Yeah.
I mean, after all, it's coming from his wife, and yet on this journey, we'll learn much more about him, and that sort of dismissive judgment softens, and we see a more complicated and sad story. It's actually quite beautiful, really, in that regard, in my opinion.
I mean,
we learn that. But it is kind of trying to make us almost biased against him to some extent at the beginning. To see it as somebody that's simply confused, and someone that is quite different to us. And yet, as we go along, his son learns much more about him, as we do as well. And we can see that his striving for importance, for self-respect, to leave a legacy, that these are common motivations.
Definitely. And I think there's no doubt that, that is something that the film is very deliberately trying to do, because obviously, the choice of Bruce Dern to play Woody, brilliant actor, and of course got, a lot of praise for his performance in this role, which he, I got the impression, again, from reading the interview with the writer, that both the director, Alexander Payne, who himself obviously is a writer, and Bruce Dern, both were really creatively contributing to this. It was quite a kind of collaborative way to make this guy as real as possible, but to kind of reveal that and not all at once. I think you're quite right. They're almost setting up a kind of stock take of a confused old man, blah blah blah, and then they're subtly undermining it to kind of take us on a bit of a journey to into like the real depths of a complicated human being, actually, which is
without and when he drives that truck at the end, and you see the subtle expressions on his face as he's doing it, he doesn't need to speak, and we don't need to hear what he's saying, because we now know enough about him and how he's responding to see that this is his moment in a way.
Yes.
And it's there. So that is a real evolution in our understanding of him from the beginning to the end, and we can then recognize how it was important for him to do this, as misguided in some ways as it was.
But
I mean, I think also one final thing about what I could say regarding this from my perspective is that that element of self-deception to some extent. Woody, I don't think fully believes that he's going to get that $1 million. I think if you watch it closely when he's in the office and he gets told the bad news, that he sort of expected it. He's not, there's no anger. and there was a kind of recognition. But I think that self-deception of, when we're so desperate to get something that we need, that we can deceive ourselves. I mean, this happens as an everyday occurrence, and it may not be something quite as flagrant as him believing that this voucher, that's really just to get you to subscribe to magazines, is actually going to pay off. It may not be as obvious as that, but we can all get self-deceiving when we're trying hard to achieve something and the odds are against us.
I think that's true. I think it's that combination, as you alluded to before, of a guy who does take people a little bit at their word. That in combination with what this burning desire he has to get this, to achieve this legacy and this self-respect. Yeah, that is the explanation for why he just seems to be so deaf to hearing that this voucher isn't real, because there's nothing really else that anybody says to him in the film that I can really recall that he doesn't pick up. It's like he is in touch with reality, apart from on that one issue. But yeah, as you said, that it is also interesting at the end when he doesn't seem that surprised either, even though he's been told and told and told it's not a real voucher and he won't hear it. He does kind of reconcile himself to that quite quickly.
Yeah.
So I think that's self-deception, and you're right. I mean, we can all do this. When, as you say, it's something that's it's a need we have that's just, we can't give it up, but we also fear we might not be able to satisfy it. Then we're put in that tempting position, I guess, to kind of buy in.
Yeah, I mean, we're all prone to self-deception, and the stronger the need and the more odds against us satisfying the need, the more there's going to be self-deception. And Woody's life doesn't really have quite the materials, so to speak, or it doesn't seem to allow him to achieve what he wants to in terms of that self-respect. I mean, he has a slightly checkered past. As you said, he was not there for his kids in the usual sense of bringing them up. He's now at the final stage of his life. He might have only a few years to live, if that. So, I mean, it's really up against it. And we could see then why he would believe in this voucher, because, as I said, it's very difficult for him not to believe in it. But on some level, I think he knew that it wouldn't quite pay out. But it was also the effort. And I think that's one of the touching things about it, is that even if he had not been the perfect dad, so to speak, that he was trying here in the only way that he could, thought that was remotely feasible.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't in reality, to redeem that. And I think that's maybe another universal aspect, is that, we do try and redeem ourselves.
That's true.
Or at least most of us feel that if we think that we've let others down that we love. And that, in his case, it's his family.
Yeah.
Particularly his kids, that he's trying to redeem himself too, as well as leave this legacy, as well as gain some self-respect again. I think that's all aspects of it.
I think that's true. And I think in a way that the universal appeal of that, you see that when David, the son, he picks up on what it is the dad wants to do, and he basically then, helps him redeem himself. I mean, he really does it for him in a way, and he kind of constructs it in such a way that, again, does Woody actually believe that they've negotiated this truck, or does he really know deep down David's just traded his own truck in and got this for him? It's like they kind of almost collude in a way, but they David's obviously seen that this is the right thing to do for what his dad needs, and it's a very, very loving kind of altruistic act, actually, because the dad's been a right difficult bugger for him. He's not been easy. He's not in any sense, either in the past or in the present, but he sees the importance of this for him, and he helps him redeem himself, actually.
Yes,
the way he couldn't have done.
No, that's true. I mean, David is someone, even as a young child, he was taking the bottles and pouring the alcohol down the sinkhole, to get rid of the alcohol. So even as a child, he was looking out for his dad, when his dad wasn't really looking out for him. And I think that's another beautiful aspect of the movie, as you say, that this is a man that in terms of his past as someone that maybe David would be potentially estranged from.
Yep.
And yet actually his son not only understands them more as they go on their journey, but also helps them to fulfill that need for self-respect by getting that truck. You know, he stages it. And maybe on some level, Woody's okay with that because, you know, he's gone on that journey to try and get the money.
Yeah.
And it didn't work out, but he did put in the effort. And so he, in a sense, and so he maybe lets that go and is happy just to receive the truck in that form. He didn't buy it, but his son arranged it for him, and he accepts that.
Yes.
There as you intimate, there's something very touching about that because you could almost say it's getting the truck is an act of grace. You know, it's not. He was undeserving of it in a way.
Yeah.
To some extent, and yet his son, out of his love for his father, allows him to have that moment, that experience, and puts it in his name.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, I mean, it's an extremely altruistic, loving act, and I think what makes it especially powerful for me as well is that, you know, again, the way Woody's backstory is told, it's so fragmented. You know, it's like we're kind of right there with David trying to make sense of why he is the way he is. And we get little glimmers, but he is such a man of few words that you're not completely sure quite what it's all about. You know, you've got a sense of ways he might have been damaged and ways in which, you know, life might have been unfulfilling for him, but it's not absolutely clear cut, but it's like there's enough there. And because it's such a kind of human, relatable dilemma, you know, that David can just kind of make that leap of faith actually and just make that act of extreme self-sacrifice, you know, just to make it all worthwhile, as you said, for Woody, for having gone through this kind of ordeal, that he does finally get something to show for it. Yeah, so yeah, it is. It's very moving.
Well, yeah, there is that grace, that redemption in that. I mean, I think the sense that we got, or at least what I got watching the movie, is that Woody was a good man in many ways, even if he'd been a bad father.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, his attempt to try and make good for his kids, it's him trying to redeem himself in some ways, and that David, you know, comes to understand and appreciate him enough that not having the money is inconsequential, really, and that he can do that final gesture for him.
You'd put as a kind of supplementary to that question, is it more to do with him being a decent person who innocently trusts others to keep their word in what is in reality a mendacious world? So I suppose this is really delving a bit more deeply, as much as we can, into Woody's character, actually. You know, how good a person is he? What's going on here? I'm getting the vibe that you think really he is quite a decent person who's been more harmed by the world. Is that kind of how you're seeing
it? I'm not. I mean, you know, he is a difficult person. I mean, we saw that in terms of how he argues with his son.
Sure.
He didn't see his son you know, he attributed cynical motives, that he stole the drink to have it for himself, when actually his 10-year-old son at the time was trying to save his father from drinking himself to death. So no, he is a difficult man in a number of ways, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And we could see why his wife Kate could be exasperated by him. But I meant that, and of course we could talk about how he got into drinking as well, because that's somewhat intimated
that's
in the
the
movie
question,
too.
isn't it? Yeah.
But for me, what I meant is that there was that decency. I can't remember what character that said it, but you know, it said he couldn't say no to anyone that I think it was Kate, actually, his wife, said he couldn't say no to anyone that needed help, and they took advantage of him. Sure. And of course, we get plenty examples of how the family could have done that. And Ed Pegram as well. You know, that I think one of the things that sort of highlights to me that, apart from what people say about him in terms of helping others out, that was his life. That's what I mean, that he was a decent person, even if he wasn't a good father. In the world at large, he was helping out, even if he wasn't that emotionally present for his kids. But that pattern would have been very common, I think, in his generation. But I think, one of the things that tells me about his decency and his somewhat innocence in a way is that there's no sense that he really understands Ed, the adversary. He does it,
sure.
And for one thing, that even when Ed tells David about Woody's affair, that he hangs his head in shame, but he doesn't get angry at Ed. He doesn't even sort of ostracize him. He doesn't really, after those many years of working with this guy, as owning that garage, he still doesn't really know that Ed is a bastard, as Kate points out. It doesn't take David long to work out what Ed is like.
Yes.
And yet Woody's got no sense really of that. It's almost like, because he has so little of that manipulativeness in that way in his nature, and that selfishness, that he doesn't really comprehend Ed.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that's true. Yeah, just that that innocence. Yeah, just born of, he would never ever contemplate acting in that way, and he can't fathom somebody who would be calculating. He's so uncalculating, really. He's so kind of straightforward, actually. And yeah, I mean, certainly with Ed, I mean, there's that, I think that scene where Ed reveals, quite maliciously about Woody having had this affair, and he asks for some money, and Woody's initial reaction is just to say, yes, how much you need in. And then I think, when it's clear that Ed's looking for a big sum, I think he just says something like, oh, well, after I get my lottery win, or something like that, so it's a kind of, even though it's that interesting contradiction, because initially, there's this sense he's got this resentment against this guy, Ed, for taking his air compressor. That comes up a lot. So there's, on the one hand, there's a sense of, as he kind of, bearing these slightly petty grudges. But no, I don't think so. Again, I think that's the complexity of the character.
I think the air compressor, remember, this is a guy that the only thing he really wants is a truck. To feel validated. So we must understand it in that context about the air compressor, that while it might seem quite inconsequential to us, it meant a lot to him. And also just that just that lack of decency in not returning the truck or the air compressor, or things like that stick with Woody.
Yes.
And we assume that that's not how he was. I mean, to me, the way I saw it is that David comes to believe in the fundamental decency of his dad, even though he knows his dad has made a lot of mistakes. But he could see how he arrived at where he was, and he sees a decency in him enough to give him that gift, so to speak, of the truck. That was my sense. I think there is that innocence, that sort of very basic way of believing that other people are going to honor their promises, or honor to return the air compressor or the truck or whatever. And when he gets that voucher, he sort of believes in it. I know there's obviously the self-deception element, but I think that what would maybe give him some hope would be that they're going to honor it just like how he would honor his commitment in that way, even if, somewhat ironically, he didn't quite honor his marriage vows completely.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely there is a decency, there's an honesty, there's a kind of innocence. It's interesting as well, I mean, again, there's like that, he's obviously, as we'll get onto, he's been damaged by things that have happened to him, childhood, the war, things like that. And then also just kind of culturally, I mean, it's quite, one of the kind of funnier moments in the movie is when all the men folks from his wider family, they're all together, all the brothers and nephews and so on, and they just sit silently, more or less, watching the TV, drinking beers, and then the wives are chatting away in the kitchen. So, you compare that to like when you see Ed Pegram in the pub, and he's kind of holding court. It's much more of a kind of lively affair. So, again, he's from a kind of Yeah, I mean, Woody's brother sits out looking at the traffic every night, just sitting on the pavement. There's such a kind of quietness there that, that is obviously just the sort of temperament, the kind of family style a little bit there, So I
Well,
think,
there is, yeah.
that
I mean, the quite a few people speak about him being a man of few words, and so are the Grant brothers in general.
yeah.
And also I have that sense that they've been somewhat hollowed out by life. I mean, as one of the characters says that, Woody started drinking young because there isn't that much to do
Mm-hmm.
his
Yep.
quarters. And then when this movie was filmed in black and white, so the landscape takes on this almost bleak and forbidding
Yeah.
quality. It doesn't seem quite hospitable. There's a certain beauty to it, but it also seems quite stark.
Yeah.
And Woody and his brothers on that farm are confronting that environment, and there's not that much to do. And drinking is one of the things that gets you through your day, gives you some. So you can almost see how that might happen. Now, of course, we could say, well, when he became a dad, he should have been, honoring his responsibilities. That's true. I'm not wanting to deny that there's certain failures as a parent.
Yeah.
Woody had
Sure.
there, but I think also that, not to excuse him quite, but I think probably his generation had different ideas of what it was to be a parent, and maybe it was more about, out there working and bringing the money back, kind of thing, that was sort of seen as what a man does.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a strong sense he is a kind of product of that specific environment. As I mean, like you said, I mean, why he started drinking, it could be something as mundane as just the sheer boredom. Obviously, people's thoughts about drinking and alcohol and so on have changed over time. Drinking heavily was again probably quite common amongst, you can imagine men, at the working age when he was in that category. And so, yeah, it's that kind of combination of what seemed quite a forbidding, harsh childhood. It didn't, I mean, again, when we get the tour through the family homestead, he doesn't say a lot. You get the, the little subtle, he would have got whipped if he was found in his mum and dad's room. You get these little kind of intimations that, this was probably quite tough and quite harsh. So, these things are thrown in there. But yeah, I mean,
and I mean,
austere. Austere, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, that austerity of the landscape and of the upbringing with the floggings, as you said, and the idea going to a bar, socializing, it would be something that many of them would have done, and it's also a form of escape.
Yeah.
And I think that Woody himself intimates that he drunk a lot. He says to David, in words to the effect, "Wouldn't you if you were married to your mum?" And I mean, that isn't quite something that excuses him, but clearly Kate is a difficult person as well.
Yeah, I mean,
his wife.
she's an interesting character as well. I mean, again, that we get, we meet her early on, and then obviously she arrives in Hawthorne. I think that's this kind of small town in Nebraska that Woody's been brought up and she's lived and so on. So we kind of get more of her then. And one of the kind of first more extended scenes with her is at the cemetery. Remember when they're, she's kind of giving them a bit of a talk about people that have been deceased, and she's really, she's telling the boys all about, who was sleeping with who and all this kind of thing, so she's got quite a kind of dirty sense of humor that comes out quite quickly. So, and then we also see her, kind of, going a little bit into battle really with family members who are kind of a bit like vultures circling, when they get a vibe of this money. So she's quite feisty as well. So she's an interesting character. Again, not developed enough, I didn't feel, as in life really, to be able to make a quick and easy summing up of her. She seemed a kind of complicated character. So
I think so. I mean, as the movie goes on, you get a sense that she does have an affection, a love for Woody. Like when he's in the hospital and, she kisses him before leaving, and she say, you could see the tenderness and concern there. And she does defend him and the family against certain certain members of the family that are like vultures.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not as though there isn't love and concern there, but we could also see that she is difficult in that she's got a somewhat relentless, quality to her, of critique. I mean, because usually when you go, if you took your son to the cemetery where his grandparents and so on are buried, that there'd be a certain respectful tone.
Yeah.
I mean, Woody is standing there while she castigates his family.
Yes.
And so to me, that was, I mean, while it's funny in a certain way, or to a certain extent, to me, it was an indicator that she is not good at validating and respecting others quite. It's not really a strong point of hers. And this is something that probably wore Woody down too over the course of his marriage.
I wonder. I mean, yes.
Well.
I mean, she's such a, she's a strikingly strong personality. She's one of the more kind of feisty characters we meet in the film. Certainly compared to his quite quiet family. She's kind of a more dominant personality. So we can there's a kind of sense of what that might have been like. Obviously, he would be the kind of, he's that kind of, he seems like kind of passively sort of stubborn guy, a little bit more inward and a little bit more, he would do his own thing. And the vibe we get obviously in the later years is that, she's kind of having blow ups because she's getting frustrated by him. He's kind of digging his heels in quietly, that this seems to be the kind of dynamic. So obviously it was, the relationship, obviously was a kind of turbulent one in that sense. And
I mean, I think we could understand why she could get frustrated at him. But for me, there's that scene when David goes to the local newspaper and he finds out that the lady that owns it and runs it was an old flame of Woody's. That scene.
Yep.
And she's a very different character to Kate.
Absolutely.
And she actually has she talks about Woody in a with some respect in a way, and even a slight admiration of him. Yeah. Clearly she's talking about Woody when he was a young man, when she knew him. But for me, when I see that scene and then I think about Kate in the cemetery, the way I put the two together is that Woody could have maybe had quite a different life with that other woman, and I think David sees that actually. That this woman might have been better for his dad in some ways, actually, and yet it was not to be.
I mean, it's very interesting, really, because again, I think the way they depicted her character, as you said, the impression is immediately of somebody who's got sensitivity, integrity. She's a kind person. She seems a really warm, commendable person. And again, these are the kind of subtle elements that I find make it a little bit difficult to come a definite judgment, really, because when David brings her up to Woody. And remember, I think in the pub later on that he's met her, he can't even really remember who she was. He's vague.
He says actually after that, that was a long time ago. Why are you bringing it up? Yeah. So my impression is that he did remember it, but didn't want to discuss it. He sees it as irrelevant. Now, and I mean, we know that Woody is not somebody to quite go into long dialogues about. Or monologues about his past, but I think he could remember it, but he didn't see the significance of it. But for me anyway, I think the audience can, in that she seems sensitive, kind. I'm not saying that Kate doesn't have any kindness in her nature, but she is rather different, and that Woody's life may have been different, which is not to say that him being an alcoholic and the way he behaves is all down to Kate as well.
No.
But I think that that this woman might have understood him a bit better.
And I think undoubtedly, I mean, I think for me, it seemed puzzling in a way that, and I take your point, maybe he was just saying he was trying to bat it off. He was saying he didn't remember, or because he didn't want to talk about it with David. I definitely get that, because it did seem otherwise a bit, again, not the more commendable side of him, that this lovely person could have been in his life and he didn't really have any memory. So did you more get the take, actually, that he's aware that this could have been an alternative life that he could have had?
I don't know if Woody quite understood the significance of it. I don't know, but I do think that he remembered it enough.
Yeah.
To dismiss it. But I think for us, we as the audience, we could see potential significance there.
Yeah.
That could have been quite a different life in some ways. Because, I mean, I think it's complex because, sure, I'm aware that Woody would have done things that could have led to a loss of respect. That why Kate could have lost some respect for him. I could see that, but also Kate is quite punitive, quite critical as a person. And his son David understands early on, and of course even more so as they go on this journey, that is not what his dad needs. That is not going to ultimately help. But Kate has never learned that.
I mean, it's quite diabolical in a way, the match, because obviously Kate, what we see of her is this extrovert, lively, bubbly person who's got a real sense of humor and likes to talk a lot, and obviously that's Woody's completely opposite to that. I mean, he's so quiet, he's such a man of few words. Obviously you get the scene when they're going around the house as a family and Kate's kind of chiming in with some of the details from his past. You get more of a sense that they have talked, and she's taken a right interest in the bigger events in his past. So there's been something there, but certainly you could see that temperamentally, on a sort of day-to-day basis, they definitely don't seem like a great match there.
No, I mean, there'd be a classic case of opposites attract.
I think so.
Whereas, the newspaper lady temperamentally seemed to be more gentle, quieter as a person.
Yeah.
But maybe not the opposite, in terms of opposites attract. And but I think like, when his son suggests that they go and see the house in which he grew up in, and he says, "What for?" Again, that dismissiveness. So I think that when he is asked about that old flame, I think he's dismissive partly or mainly because, he doesn't really see himself as important. He's lost that. Because, like to talk about your past and to analyze it is showing yourself indirectly anyway a degree of self-respect and importance. He doesn't really, it goes back to a point I made earlier. He doesn't really have an interest in his life. And yet we develop, and I think this is one of the poignant things about the movie, is that we develop that interest, in his life, but he doesn't really have it. He's lost touch with that maybe years ago.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like in that interview I mentioned earlier, the writer talked about that scene in the homestead, the family, the four of them going together, was being the most difficult one that he had to write. And he said that there was one line where he wrote it and wrote it and wrote it. And I think it was about Woody's asked about a brother that died in childhood. And I think David says something to him, "Do you remember that, Dad?" or something. And Bob Nelson's original draft, he put, Woody says, "Sure, I was there." And then by the time it made the final cut, they'd edited it further down to just, "I was there." And it was like,
exactly.
It was this, everything that was being done was to really kind of, pare it down and just to, as you said, to really convey this person that doesn't really want to speak about it. Does that just isn't, he isn't going to go off on a long,
and well, I think this is the thing that, I mean, that's an interesting point that you raise. I think that's a good, point there. Because for me, this idea of I was there, I think this is the thing that he's lost so much interest in his life. He's so demoralized in many ways that he will affirm factually he was there. But the significance is something that he's lost, and and when people are very depressed and demoralized, they don't really have there's no rich significance to their life. I mean, they could talk factually about their life,
Yeah.
but the meanings of it are gone. It's almost like they don't have that existential status. And
Yeah.
so it's I mean, their lives, the way they see them, are as barren as that landscape.
I mean,
And
yeah.
so Woody can say, I was there.
Yep.
That's true, but he doesn't seem to understand that people want the meanings, the details, the significances. For him, that's all gone, really. And it's the same with his old flame, that relationship that might have been actually a much better fit for him.
Yeah.
It's all gone now. There is the future of cashing in on this voucher, but the past, the significance of it is all barren and insignificant from his point of view.
I think, I mean, it's quite a kind of subtle point, really, because I mean, it reminds me again, the part where David finally asks him, it was in one of the bar experiences, why did you actually have kids? Because he clearly didn't want to, and Woody just says, I liked screwing, and it's such a kind of callous way to speak, to say that to your son. But yeah, I mean, I take your point when you're thinking about somebody who is depressed and detached. It's an honest answer, and he is very honest. And obviously, it's it's not going to be an easy thing for his son to hear, but it's like he's that's where he's at now. He is just so.
I mean, it was an insensitive and somewhat callous but truthful reply.
Yeah.
But I mean, when he says to David, we figured that if we screwed long enough, two of you would come along, and so there was still it wasn't as though having family was necessarily unwanted.
No,
but I think the thing is that for me, it's important to see that. And okay, it's obviously easy for me to say this because I'm not David in that situation. I'm sure that could hurt. But I think if we see it in terms of Woody's life, that he was drifting into things. He drifted into parenthood. He obviously drifted into that relationship with Kate in many ways. And so it was a bit like going with this sort of flow, and there wasn't much sense of active choice and agency. In fact, the time where he's exercised the greatest agency and determination is now in this quest to cash that voucher.
Yeah.
But for the majority of his life, he drifted into things, as a lot of people do, because if we listen to videos of Tony Robbins and people like him, we get the impression that people are quite determined and active in their lives. But a lot of the time, major things happen by just people drifting into them, particularly in Woody's time and in his circumstances. And so, I mean, his son, David, thinking actively about his choices is a kind of more modern sensibility that Woody, and also David, does have more self-respect than what Woody probably ever had. And Woody's drifting into it is very different to David's reflectiveness about it.
Exactly. And of course, this is the thing, we're dealing with Woody, decades later, who's in a different place, really. So again, I mean, it seems incongruous, like the affair that we don't hear really much about. Ed Pegram drops it in, and it seems the way he's described it, Woody was head over heels in love at this point with this woman he was having an affair with, and then I don't think we even really find out what happened, why it ended. He just, as you said, he bows his head. But obviously there's this side, this passionate side of him that, I suppose we're seeing in a way in terms of his doggedness, but we're not really, it could be like a different person, and obviously we're having that same kind of jarring experiences as David, and trying to kind of piece this together and make sense of what this all adds up to and who this guy quite is, Well,
I mean, the fear, how much it was him pursuing it, how much he was pursued is unclear. How much he wanted it to last, what he would have done to make it last. Would he have left Kate. I mean, Ed Pegram says, divorce was seen as a sin back then, and that may be um, the main reason, or one of the reasons why Woody didn't leave Kate.
Yep.
But yeah, that's yeah. I mean, I didn't necessarily find that detail jarring to my sense of Woody. Obviously, I didn't necessarily expect it.
Yeah.
But I could see how someone like him could drift into that. How he could have been undecided about what to do, and then it was decided for him. There's ways for him to have conducted that affair without it being too much active and passionate in the usual sense.
Yes.
I could also see, not that I'm condoning what he did, but I could also see why he might have outsourced that love that maybe he didn't feel greatly in that marriage.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Not to say that that's excusing him, but we could see that Kate was maybe not quite right for him.
Yep.
Even though what he did was wrong too.
We sort of touched on these issues. I'm wondering if it might be, just good to tie this up with the third question, really, which was really about, I mean, you've said this movie is in many ways about family. And, the question of what does it say ultimately, if you could construe any particular message from it about marriage, the relationship between parents and children, or say between wider family relations. What's your kind of sense for, because it is a kind of family movie in terms of its.
Well, it is.
What do you think it's really getting at?
Well, I mean, I think it obviously shows that marriage can be a complicated and not always fulfilling experience. I mean, the Kate and Woody isn't necessarily a happy marriage, but it's not as though it was devoid of meaning and connection at all. But it's certainly, the fact that we encounter the newspaper lady shows how radically different his life could have been married to someone else, potentially.
Yep.
So it's certainly not portraying marriage as a meeting of soulmates there. It could be something that just happens for reasons that are, or should have been, more secondary than primary, that you might have been a better match with the other lady, but Kate won for other reasons. And so they're making the best of it. It did seem a bit like Kate and Woody making the best of a situation that was not ideal and maybe in some ways structurally ill-fitting in terms of temperament and in terms of how good each would be for the other. So I saw its portrayal of marriage as being quite realistic. There, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's difficult, really, because obviously that is really the primary marriage that is depicted, and obviously, there's the sense there could have been this previous partner that might have been a better fit. I think it's, I mean, for me, it's probably easier to make a kind of judgment more about what it's saying about family more broadly, rather than, I think, just purely in terms of, because you see more, family members and their relations to each other. And it's also, and again, it's kind of I felt it was just a bit of a kind of, it was neither terribly pessimistic nor kind of, certainly not, rosy and sentimental. It was kind of gently, humorously mocking in a way. But again, it kind of showed, it showed that kind of coexistence in a way within families, like you see when, they think Woody's got the money, that there is, there can be some quite ruthless, behavior by some family members trying to, get a cut of this money. But obviously it harks back to, earlier days when, they've all been poor. There's been elements of helping each other out. And obviously Woody, we here has been somebody who's been quite generous to others whenever they've needed it. But, it kind of depicts a sort of, for me, a kind of, I don't know, there's a comfort and there's a there for each other. We get when him and David first drop in Hawthorne and stay with his brother and so on. There's that aspect, but obviously there's a kind of taking each other for granted as well, with the family that are, like the nephews who ultimately, who are obviously have got a criminal record and goodness knows what they're getting up to, and they steal Woody's ticket. And so, there's that kind of unsavory aspect to them. So, I don't know. I thought it kind of portrayed family in a kind of probably realistic and slightly humorous way as well. I don't know.
I would agree with you. I mean, the point you made about them being the main marriage in the movie is true. Although the marriage, we get a glimpse of Woody's brother and his wife, that setup they have. And it may be that this is just what it's like to be married to the Grants in some ways. But yeah, I think it was making the best of it, marriage. I mean, it wasn't like it was that it was very passionate or that they had much great in common. The marriages that we see, I mean, they seem to be quite settled and quiet in some ways. I still think it was showing how family can be detrimental to each other. There's the obvious case, as you say, about the cousins and the nephews that rob Woody and David, try to steal so there's that in terms of, and also the family members behaving like vultures in some ways. So there's that, but I think also for me, I still have that sense that the Woody and Kate marriage, how much that was ultimately good for each other is doubtful in some ways, even though I do see there would be love and affection there. So it's not loveless, but I think there would have been that Kate contributed to that erosion of self-respect. I think Woody did it as well.
Yeah.
I think he was his own worst enemy in some ways, but I do think it could show how these very close family ties can be destructive in some ways. But also when we see Woody and David, we can see how family could really support each other too.
I mean, it's interesting because I think David, he's the one that wants to go and have the catch up. They're on this road trip, and he wants them to stop and see Woody's brother and so on, who obviously he hasn't seen for a while, and obviously Woody himself is quite indifferent to that prospect. I thought it was interesting that David, who it seems like hasn't had much of an experience of family, really. Obviously as a child, things have been a bit unsatisfactory in the family home, and because the wider family, they're in Montana and the wider family's in Nebraska, there seems like there's a genuine interest and kind of wish to catch up. And obviously, when he meets his cousins, that it's kind of, the lack of relating there is quite funny. Obviously they are quite malicious characters, really. They're quite kind of comedically, but certainly quite
quite
self-interested, quite ignorant. Yeah. So, it's like the family members that stayed in Hawthorne really do seem to take each other for granted. But David didn't have that, and it's like still there's a draw to try and, find out about his family. And, he tries to make more conversation when he's around them. And, you kind of, it's a little bit unfortunate really, because you can see he would obviously be quite well suited to a family environment, and he'd be quite a kind of, a kind, helpful family member to be involved with, but he's kind of been.
He's a very decent person. We see that early on in the movie, and he believes in that, honoring those family ties, and has that interest in meeting up with other members of his family that Woody doesn't remotely, have.
Yes.
But I think an interesting dynamic here is between David and Ross, his older brother, in that, it wasn't like they were mortal enemies. You could see that they could get on, the two brothers, but they were quite different people.
Yeah.
And Ross is someone that is a bit more like his mum, in terms he sides more with his mum, with Kate.
Yeah.
He keeps on saying to David, mum's right. And so he's like the advocate for Kate.
Yeah.
And David, in some regards, is the advocate, well, in a very profound sense, as the movie goes on, as an advocate for his dad, or at least someone there for his dad. And his older brother is a news anchor. He's obviously got this career, whereas David is working in this electronics store. And so they've got quite different lives. And David is a little bit lost, like his dad at the start of the movie.
Definitely,
A little bit in limbo.
Yep.
Whereas Ross's career anyway, is going from strength to strength. So they're quite different people. And Ross, well, he mellows a little bit towards things as he takes he takes part a bit in this journey.
Yeah.
Later on in the movie, still fundamentally someone that doesn't really understand his dad and probably couldn't, to be honest. And I think that he, to some extent, exemplifies that danger of seeing things on a surface level. I could see why he's resentful towards his dad. He says his dad wasn't there for either of them growing up, but that's sort of like where he stays. And I'm not sure that if he'd been on that journey like David is on, that he would have come to the same understanding of his dad.
I don't. Yeah, it's interesting. No, probably not. I don't think so. I mean, I think that. I mean, I got a vibe. That obviously the mum and Kate and Ross join sort of belatedly. And they're obviously in Hawthorne, and that they kind of go from the. I thought it was quite. To me, it seemed like when they're doing the tour of the family homestead, both boys are deeply interested. It's like this is a window into this puzzling man that's been their father, that they've been a bit, they just haven't had this very strong relationship with. So I did feel there was a certain sense of them kind of coming together and both being equally keen to try and fathom him. Although I think you're right that David could go further with that and would be ultimately more emotionally attached.
I think he went further, literally and metaphorically. There, I mean that Ross did join in on that journey to some extent, and it's not as though he's disinterested in his dad's past. But I think there is a difference between doing the tour, like the house kind of thing, and having an interest in that, than the deeper empathy. And I think that, it's not like Ross is estranged from his dad. It's not like he's condemning him completely. But I think that, we don't see quite that that sort of deepening as we do with David. And for me, I'm just wondering whether he would have been prepared for that or capable of that. He certainly doesn't have the time quite for that, because he would have to get back and get on the TV.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I don't think so. No, I thought though it was interesting that after that you have the scene where the four of them have that little kind of escapade, where David and Ross decide to steal this air cooler, and it turns out to be the wrong one. And I thought in that, we have them as a kind of foursome, as a family.
Yes,
and,
we do.
There's a little bit of fun, and there's, I felt like there was elements like that to me that were given a sort of somewhat nuanced take on it all. Because obviously it wasn't a totally fulfilling family experience, that's for sure, for the boys. Neither was Woody's upbringing, but there's still something in that. They are still together there. There is care for each other. So
there's care for each other, and I mean they have quite a bit of fun. The two the two brothers, as they steal the air compressor. They think from Ed Pegram's barn, but it's not. And so they do come together. So but that isn't really what I was quite meaning. I'm not saying that they didn't have their moments. I'm not saying that they didn't work at all as a family. I'm just speaking about the empathy required quite
No,
to
I get that.
and at that level, that's where Ross doesn't really participate, and I don't know how much that would have been his scene. I mean, in a way, he's a newsreader. He reads out facts, or at least alleged facts, and and I think that for him, he probably had a similar view to his mum about how Woody was, whereas David, understands him more deeply as it goes on as well.
Oh yeah, no. To be honest, I was just kind of more thinking of the previous question about the depiction of family just being kind of a new one.
Yeah,
But
no,
yeah,
I get your
I
point in that way, and I think that's true. I mean, we see how that family could have worked in a way. I mean, at the end of the day, the two guys have turned out well, shall we say? You know what I mean? That as people, so I don't think the family was that dysfunctional to the and it's not like they hate each other or anything like that. That clearly the two brothers get on, and that the way Ross responds in that bit of the journey shows an interest and affection for his father. I don't think he hates him.
No.
But we have to admit that at the beginning of the movie, he's quite keen to bung him in a home in quite a dismissive sort of. We almost seen it as like what he deserves. And so, Ross has got that, what we call that sort of eye for an eye kind of thing. He wasn't there for us growing up. He never cared about us. He's a burden now.
Yeah.
He should go in a home. And that's not how David looks at it.
I agree. I mean, I think it struck me in that scene that it was almost like it was showing the kind of now mainly lost potential, in a sense that the four, they obviously didn't have a life, or we don't get the impression they had a life where they were together and they were maybe doing trips that were interested in. There was that kind of communication that might have kind of, it was like it sort of showed a kind of embryonic view of what it maybe was like at times, or maybe could have been like as a kind of foursome. The question we were going to kind of end on was really, I mean, you sort of have the take that Woody seems to have been a guy hollowed out by his inability to say no to helping people, and so what could we maybe say the movies take is on altruism and gratitude?
We could obviously see that it is recommending that we understand each other as fully as we can, as empathically as we can, because clearly at the start of the movie, you've got this very strong sense of what Woody might be, and characters are somewhat supporting that. But as we learn more about his life and piece it together, we get a somewhat different depiction of him. So I think it is definitely saying that we should be empathic and not too quick to judge other people. We need to know their story, and that the more strange, to use the Amazon Prime label, someone is, that maybe the more that we have to get their story and see things from their perspective to some extent. Definitely. To understand them. So there is that thing about altruism and empathy there in the ethic of the movie.
Yeah.
But I think also that if we take Kate at her word that Woody was someone always helping other people and getting taken advantage of by others, that you can see what could happen to someone there, that they could be look at the way Ed treated him. He becomes a figure of fun. This is someone that he worked with, a colleague and a friend for many years. And yet when Ed finds out that the voucher is just this marketing ploy, and he reads it out in the pub, and he still does that when Woody appears in the pub. It's not really a kind of fair payment for all that help, isn't it?
No,
and
that's
support
right.
through the years, and even the vultures in the family, they don't really appreciate all the help, working on their cars for free and so on. And clearly, they were bringing their cars to his garage as much as they could
Yeah.
and getting freebies. And that was his life work. And he did that for them. And yet they still think they're entitled to money. So there's a lack of. So I think there's this idea that if you're going to be helping people, expect there could be some exploitation from some people, that there will be ingratitude as well. That if we see Woody as being a demoralized man in many ways, and then we look at Ed, who seems, that they're not much different in age, and yet he seems to have a vigor and a life to him, given his age. It says something about what that life of altruism versus that selfish life, where you might end up, the unfairness of it in a way.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I wonder. I mean,
I'm not saying it's said. I don't mean that it's saying that you're foolish to help others. I don't think it's saying that by any means, because obviously David has helped his dad profoundly.
Yeah.
But what I mean is that it shows how things can go wrong.
I mean, obviously with David, you have quite a savvy person. That really, he is really a very exceptional human being, actually, when you kind of, the way he behaves himself, and it's the kind of combination of kindness and empathy and also insight. He is somebody that is kind of aware what his cousins are like, for example. I mean, he knows, obviously it's not rocket science, but he knows they were the ones that mugged them, and he knows where to go to try and get that ticket back, and he knows what's going on with Ed and so on. So yeah, it's like he's kind and he's altruistic, but he's a lot more savvy than his dad is, and that means he's probably much less likely to be getting exploited by these others who are maybe, they try to. It's funny that they do try to go through him initially, like Ed and some of the family members. They've sort of detected he's a nice guy, and he's the one that they kind of target initially to make their request to, about getting a cut from Woody. But he kind of sees through that, and he's not actually.
And I think you're right. I think you're right that if you're discerning, you can be altruistic, you can be kind like David. But clearly, Woody didn't have that discernment. I mean, he doesn't seem to have twigged even now that Ed is a bastard.
No,
he doesn't seem to have comprehended that about Ed, even though it's very obvious. And his wife has remarked on it, but still, Woody doesn't see it that way. So he doesn't really have quite that savvy, that discernment that is joined by that kindness that David has.
Sorry.
And of course, if you've got that innocence, then you could get somewhat pummeled by that exploitation and ingratitude from others, which we don't see with David. What we do see with David, though, is that, part of his journey is that, or a key part of his journey is that he's a very kind person, but I think he had a little bit of problem with being assertive. So we see when he's sitting with his cousins and they're taking the piss, and initially it's okay, you can let it go, but they do harp on about it, and it also gets less and less pleasant. But David doesn't say anything, and then there is that moment where he punches Ed Pegram, in the bar, and he turns around and he stops and he reflects on it, because I think that's him standing up for his dad and himself. There. And this is not something that he had quite learnt to do until he'd been on that journey.
I think so. I think a bit like Woody, as we discussed earlier, how we're given an initial slightly cliched picture and then it's sort of subtly undermined. It's like that really, because we meet David, I think his ex-girlfriend's moved out and she's coming over and the plants are dying, and you get a bit of a sense of a guy who's a bit in disarray, and you see him at his job as a salesman and it doesn't seem to be going too well. So yeah, it does kind of, again, you could kind of make a sort of cliched reading of that, but actually there's a lot more to him as we see as the film goes on. And I think you're right. I mean, definitely part of it is about he becomes more assertive, for himself as well. I think that's true. I mean, I almost felt like it culminated in him becoming a bit like a parent for his dad, really, because his dad's he is a bit vulnerable. He can't really do it for himself. And kind of contriving this finale to their journey in that kind of selfless way, as we discussed, it is a bit like he's kind of, it's a bit like, well, he has to kind of parent himself because he can't really recapture, what was lost there with his dad. But in having understood it, it's like he can move into that more confident, independent role, that more paternal role, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, it looks as though from a young age he was kind of doing that, when he was pouring the bottles of booze down the sink, that he was looking out for his dad. And yeah, you're right. At the end of the journey, he's very much like the parent. And that there's maybe some natural to that in a way because of Woody being in the twilight years and needing that support and that protection there, and that David understands that. But yeah, I think that that scene where his ex-partner turns up and it's not clear whether they're going to get back together, and she mentions about the plants not having been watered.
Yeah.
If we were seeing it in a very literal way, we might think this guy can't take care of anything.
Yeah.
And yet, of course, we see that he takes care of his dad in this subtle and profound way. And so, yeah, I think definitely this movie is about don't make snap judgments about people. We have to really see them in the round. And we see that with David. And I think, an interesting thing about it is that his brother Ross has got this prominence to some extent, being on the TV.
Yeah.
And he's working at this electronics store. His brother's got the kind of more prestigious career, whereas he has this kind of job, and yet he's the extraordinary human being.
Yeah, and we don't know that, as you say that. I mean, to an extent, there's a kind of growth in him, but yeah, you're right. I mean, there's signs of it having been there, but yet he could so easily be dismissed on the basis of his, lower social status compared to his brother. But
you can, I mean, you can see it with it being an American movie.
Yeah,
that in America, there could be that temptation to judge them on their social status and think that Ross was the superior one, and so it certainly has superior social status, but he's the extraordinary one, actually.
And he doesn't actually, I'm sure there's a point where he's asked about his brother, and his brother's success by family members, and he's not actually particularly resentful or jealous, as you could imagine, it would be understandable in a way if he's feeling a bit sore about what he does, but there's none of that. So he's quite devoid of that. And it's interesting. He's not a resentful guy, but as you described, when he does finally punch Ed Pegram, which, is enormously deserved, actually. And then it's like he really, kind of lets himself enjoy a little bit more that fight back, and then he's really, he comes up with this plan where he's hiding, his dad's driving past, and, he really kind of takes he kind of really comes to life, actually, and in that process of becoming a bit more assertive and standing up for himself. So yeah, he's
he does, and it's kind of like a Tolstoyan moment for him. He has to do something that was difficult for him, in fact, against his instincts, because Ed Pegram is an elderly man.
Yeah,
he's a bastard, but he's an elderly man. But so for somebody as empathic as David to punch there, to assert something, he's asserting his own self-respect too, because you can see that he's a little bit like his dad, that he could just take jibes.
Yeah,
like he could maybe put up with bad treatment. You could maybe see that passivity a bit in his character.
Yeah.
And yet he comes to assert himself through asserting his dad's need for respect and himself, his own self-respect.
Yeah, it's a bit like, the transformation of passivity into empathy proper, really. It's kind of latent in him, but as you said, it errs on the too passive, in the slightly negligent, and it, but there's something of real substance there in him.
Yeah, you get the impression that David could have been quite an observant child, sensitive to the parents' needs, but not really doing too much. Maybe coasting a little bit, a bit like his dad.
Yeah.
And then this quest, this journey, which of course he doesn't believe in the prize for obvious reasons, but this journey is him doing something active, and an active desire to care and support his dad.
Yeah. And there is a kind of enthusiasm in him actually for this journey,
yes.
against the consternations of Kate. He wants to do this. So there is an element of he also just wants that bit of time with his dad, which obviously he doesn't ordinarily get, so that again.
He sees it as an opportunity, and maybe one of the last opportunities to do it, because his dad is old and may not live very long. And, like he has that desire to stop in front of Mount Rushmore now. Yeah. I mean, Woody just sees that as pointless, a waste of time. But David understood it as a opportunity to bond. And they're not, and it's the sort of more obvious touristy things that don't bond them.
Yes.
It's more the subtle things that bring them closer together.
Yeah. Interesting.
So that would be, that's how I'd kind of see it regarding those two.
Yes,
Woody and David.
I think so. Yeah, and again, the kind of moral compass of the film is quite clear there. I mean, there are, it's unequivocal that the way that some of the family members are behaving, isn't really quite up to it. And I think even as you said, with Ross compared to David, he has no interest in this journey initially, so he's gotten to a point with his dad where obviously he's just not interested in spending the time with him. There's obviously been that bitterness as a result of the neglect.
Yes,
but David,
and then we can understand that in a way. But I think, to me, that the movie, the ethic of the movie, is still suggesting that is a limited way of understanding what happened.
Yeah.
Because David comes to a somewhat different conclusion, even if it's not, spelled out directly. It's not one of resentment or bitterness. One of the interesting things about our discussion is that we experience this movie slightly differently as well. I mean, okay, we could see it in the most basic way that that's what happens when two people watch a movie, but because it was a quite understated movie, you could expect that we could maybe experience it somewhat differently too.
Definitely. I mean, it is extremely subtle. You're right. I think that's what makes it a particularly great movie. I mean, I was thinking about it. Was interesting, just even in advance of recording, thinking about the kinds of questions and so on. Initially, when thinking about some of the films we've talked about previously, like Rear Window, and we obviously did Shawshank Redemption. Those films, in a way, they were kind of more obvious aspects that was hard not to agree on, in terms of, like, you could think about voyeurism as a theme in Rear Window and things like that. But this was an extremely subtle film, but probably compared to those other two had far more realistic characters in terms of, like, with all the complexity of real people and the kind of nuance and also the experience you get in life. And obviously you get in Pinter Plays as well, of only just a partial reveal based on a little bit of fragmented speech in some cases. So it does make for a film that people probably will have different takes on, actually.
I think so. I mean, but yeah, I would argue that it has to be somewhat pro-Woody overall, the movie, because otherwise that moment, his moment in the sun or his moment in the truck, wouldn't quite make sense. Really there. However, it's not like it's quite fully deserved either. Because clearly he's failed to do a number of things as a parent and as a husband over the course of his life. But I think we can forgive him to some extent at the end.
I think so. I mean, because there was a nice quote, actually, I copied here from the writer, and he says, I was trying to get you started wondering, who is this guy and why is he behaving this way? It's something hard for kids to realize that parents had lives before they were born, and there are little reveals here. And he, blah, blah, blah. And he said, he relates it to his own father. He says when he came back from the war, he was a little bit quieter and something had changed in him. So I think so. I think that's it. It wants you to wonder about Woody, and it definitely doesn't want you to come to an extremely negative judgment about him. That's for sure. I mean, there's certainly a warming to him.
Yeah, probably. I mean, to my mind, it probably is more a forgiving judgment.
I think so. No, I wouldn't disagree with that. Yeah.
Because if David, the way that David reacts to his dad is suggesting to some extent how we should be towards Woody.
Yeah.
Even though David finds out about the affair, it doesn't really come between them. And it doesn't actually become that big an issue ultimately between him and his son.
I think it's got a very kind of humane tone, and I think that's what it's trying to engender. Actually, I mean, there are kind of baddies in it, Ed Pegram being the kind of primary one, but I think it's just trying to depict real people, with a kind of moral conscience at work there. And definitely, I think you're right, Woody. When we get beyond the initial kind of cranky and much diminished kind of man that we see, I think you're right. There is a kind of complicated character there that isn't a bad guy. Definitely isn't a bad guy overall. I think that's true, and I think that's exactly what David realizes as well, as you said. That's the sort of same.
Yeah, and you get the sense that that's what David suspected even before they went on that journey, because he's not bitter, even at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, that's right.
Towards his dad. So, David probably suspected there'd be a larger story there.
Yes.
And that it would come from getting to know his dad better.
Yeah, and although he only gets a very fragmentary account, he gets enough. He gets enough to. Yeah.
He gets enough.
Yeah.
But so that was great. Anyway, talking about it, and
it was. Yeah, I mean, definitely a great film, and I think it was multiple nominations. I think Bruce Dern got a Best Actor award at Cannes. Yeah. It wasn't. He didn't get the Oscar, but I think he might have got an Oscar nomination. I think it got quite a lot.
He did, yeah. I think there was quite a few Oscar nominations. For the movie. But he did win at Cannes Best Actor, and it was definitely deserved.
Yeah, it was. It was
because
he
portrayed the character in a man of few words in this understated way. And the complexity of the emotions there.
I mean, it really would have been worthy of a Best Actor Oscar as well. Actually, it was a phenomenal. Really, I mean, few people really could have played that part to that extent. I mean, it really was quite. He really lived the character. It felt, Bruce Dern. So
he did, and I think the guy, I don't know the actor's name that played David, but I'd read that he was on Saturday Night Live quite a bit.
Yes,
But he was apprehensive about doing this movie, probably because it was one of his first acting jobs. And of course, he's working with an eminent director and a great actor as his co-actor, co-supporting actor. And Bruce Dern had said to him, well, find out what the truth is in each scene and act that. And so I think clearly Bruce Dern and the other people had got a sense of the truth of each scene and acted it out in this very realistic way. It's almost like an American Mike Leigh movie.
It's actually, that's right. That's a good point. It is. It's got that. Yeah, each scene was being kind of allowed to kind of be nurtured by the actors as well, and it feels very, very real. Indeed. A great film.
Indeed. And so we certainly recommend it to people if they haven't already seen it.
Yes, definitely one to watch, as are a lot of Alexander Payne's films, actually. He is one of the better, in my opinion, one of the better kind of modern filmmakers. He's...
Yeah, well, I enjoyed About Schmidt and I really liked Sideways too. you know,
and he's
which was another road movie.
That's right. Yeah, it's definitely a kind of genre he really likes, and he doesn't churn the movies out as well. I think he had a 7-year hiatus or something after. Maybe was that
yeah.
I can't remember, but yeah, there's some really good films to look at there.
But I think, that idea of the odd couple on the road, is what he likes, and and Sideways was to some extent more comedic, I think, but it still had its dramatic aspects. But this was more a drama. It was a quirky comedy in some ways, but it was more a drama.
Yeah, probably more drama than outright comedy. But yeah, again, nice little funny moments as well in a very unforced way. It all just kind of flows in a natural way, I think. But
I think it didn't want to veer too much towards the comedic, because it was about this guy trying to win his self-respect, and if it had veered too much towards the ridiculous, it would be then so easy to satirize Woody's quest.
Yeah, definitely a sort of delicate balance there. I think you're right. Just kind of shadings of humor. But yeah, I guess we probably just about out of time with that one tonight, Alex. But really good speaking about it. And yeah, definitely really good film.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Right, cheers. Bye-bye.